there, welcome to Extra Healthy-ish, the big sister podcast to Healthy-ish. This podcast from Body and Soul gives you that little bit extra in your day for your mind, body and soul. I'm your host, Felicity Harley. So today's guest has been on the podcast before. Dr. Rebecca Ray is a clinical psychologist, and last time we talked about her new book called Setting Boundaries. Well, after we finished recording, we just got into this really long chat, and up came this word called fawning. Have you heard of it? Well, I was intrigued and I thought you might be too. So I said, Beck, you've got to come back on and talk us through what fawning is. Basically, it's people pleasing, over niceness and bending over backwards, well, to please people. So Beck is on. She's going to tell us what it is all about, signs to look out for in you, and how to deal if someone around you, if you feel they are fawning too or just fawning. So, she's back to talk about it. Beck, thank you. Well, welcome back to Healthy-ish. Not thank you for coming on. And I probably asked you this before. In fact, I did. How do you stay extra healthy-ish in your life? Or maybe how are you staying extra healthy-ish today?
So it's changed. I love that you asked me that before.
Okay.
Yes, and I can report back now because we spoke some months ago now and things have changed. So I told you last time that I'm reestablishing my relationship with my body after a traumatic pregnancy back in 2018. It's taken me a long time to recover. And so psychologically, the way I stay healthy-ish is self-compassion. Self-compassion rules my world, both my to-do list and my relationship with my body. But I also now swim. So I have discovered swimming, not a swimmer, never been a swimmer, hated school carnivals at school. But here we are. And it's one of the most mindful, most loved part of my day.
There we go. So what is your weekly routine look like with swimming? What do you actually do?
I do breaststroke. That's what I do. So I swim 4 days a week and I go to personal training 2 days a week. I swim about 2 kilometres during that time.
Oh, wow, that's impressive.
Well, it's not when you're doing breaststroke. Like if I tried to do 1 lap of freestyle, I'd die. So let's calm down on what's impressive because there's a lot of work for me to do.
It's impressive to someone who doesn't know swimming.
Okay. I'm impressing myself slowly, but we can work up to freestyle. And essentially, I just do laps. So I go to the local public pool and I swim back and forth and just follow that blue line. And the mindfulness, we talked last time we were chatting about mindfulness with exercise. And you know how you mentioned that emotion shifts with motion?
Yes, that's my famous saying. Well, yes, not mine. I think I borrowed it from someone else, but my mantra in life.
But it works. And that's what I do whenever I go swimming. It's not about killing myself like I do at personal training. It's simply about long, mindful time where I can just connect with myself in the water.
And has that related to being more compassionate about yourself? Is that kind of fed into that, or is that a separate thing?
No, it all coexists. But the self-compassion has actually happened over the last few years since I was pregnant, put on a stack of weight. So being someone that was in my body but didn't recognize my body absolutely was a head wreck for me. It just warped my relationship with myself. So I've done so much work from a place of self-compassion that I can now respect and love my body for what it can do for me. And so swimming came about because what I was looking for is something that I could do in summer. So I hate Queensland humidity. It just drives me insane. And I don't want to be sweating at 5 o'clock in the morning if I go out for like a walk or something. And so swimming is something that I can do at this time of year. And there's not that mental barrier about how hot it's going to be.
I like that. Swimming. There we go. Oh, the humble swim. It's probably
the humble swim.
The humble swim. Very underrated.
Make it easy. We need to make it easy.
Exactly. Okay. Now, changing a bit of tact here. We're going from swimming to fawning. I don't even know a segue into that.
Fine, no.
We're talking about fawning. Can you, for those listeners who didn't listen to Healthy-ish, can you quickly recap what fawning is?
Fawning is essentially people pleasing. It's appeasing and pleasing behaviour that is part of the fight, flight, freeze fawn response. So fawn has recently been added to our survival instinct, which listeners might know as the fight-flight response. And it's a more subtle set of behaviours, which are essentially the person doing whatever they need to do in the situational social interaction to make the other person happy, or to reduce conflict, or to not rock the boat.
So can it be Can it be destructive?
Yeah, it can. And it's destructive. Actually, it's destructive in two ways. And I didn't talk about this in Healthy-ish, but firstly, it's destructive if the people pleaser's needs are not being met. So sometimes it can be a superpower if their needs are being met and they're just being super great at compromising, but it's very destructive if their needs aren't met, because they'll end up as a ball of resentment eventually. That's guaranteed. It can also be destructive because people pleasing can actually be quite a manipulative strategy in social interactions. So people pleasers operate from a place of unconscious self-protection. I'm not saying they mean to do this, but what it can actually be received as by the other person in the social interaction is manipulation. I can't possibly say no to you now because you're being super kind. You're being too nice to me. And so I don't know how to navigate this situation. It can bring on guilt, and it can bring on just confusion on the part of the receiver, because they never quite know where the people pleaser stands. And that's because that people pleaser does not speak up for their own needs.
Actually, I have to throw in a little personal story here. We've got this, I have come from a family of people pleasers, and I know all my sisters and aunties and mothers will put their hand up about this, but we've got this saying in our family called the guilt train. If you jump on the guilt train, if you don't go to a family event, you jump on the family guilt train. And it is that. It does bring up feelings of guilt, if you're the receiver to the people pleaser, doesn't it? And then you feel bad. Okay, I'll come anyway. I'll do it anyway.
Absolutely. And then you can feel like, oh, I don't want you to do it just because you're trying to please me. I want you to do it because you want to do it. So it messes with the flow of the social interaction, because the receiver can often then feel like they then need to take responsibility for the needs of the people pleaser, because the people pleaser can't be trusted to take responsibility for their own needs.
So if you are a people pleaser, how can you take responsibility for your own needs? How can you recognise, oh, I'm starting to get in my people pleasing mode, I must stop this?
Yeah, so normally that will start with a feeling. I always like people to come from feelings first, because we're often more aware of feelings than we are of thoughts, because feelings are uncomfortable. So I want the people pleasers listening to us to look out for anxiety. Anxiety will probably be your default state. And when you notice your anxiety rising, that's more likely when you're likely to revert to those people pleasing behaviors. So the first thing is awareness. Am I feeling anxious? If you're feeling anxious, just stop, take a breath, maybe a couple of breaths, and assess the situation to see whether or not your needs need to be communicated at that point.
And there are some benefits, right, to being a people pleaser. I mean, it's all not destructive and a bad cycle to get into.
No, not at all.
What are the benefits?
The benefits are that it's a relational superpower. It's amazing. People pleasers are so adept at being able to read other people's needs. They're amazing to have around, because often they're more aware of your needs than you are. So as long as the people pleasers' needs are met, as long as they're respecting their own rights and they're being respected by other people and they're communicating what they need, people pleasing is actually a fantastic relationship strategy and can really strengthen the connection between that person and the person that they're interacting with.
We'll be back after this short break with more from Beck. And are women more physiologically vulnerable to this behaviour than men, or what? I mean, I feel like you could group women are more attuned with this behaviour, or do we fall for it, or where do we sit in terms of the genders?
So they're definitely more psychologically vulnerable to the behaviour, and that's generally because culturally we are conditioned to behave in certain ways that are deemed acceptable whereas men are conditioned to behave in certain ways that are deemed acceptable for them. It's different. Our behaviors that are acceptable for the genders are different. Men are rewarded for being confident and assertive. You know, if they speak up for their needs, oh, look at him. He's charismatic. He's like, he knows what he wants and he's going after it. If a woman does that, then she is considered hysterical or high maintenance or a ball buster.
Too hard. So hard work.
Yes, we're too hard. We're too much. We're extra. And that means that we essentially grow up thinking, oh, I can't possibly speak up for my needs because I'm deemed as unacceptable if I do that.
So how do we speak up for our needs with that going on in society? How can we, I suppose, find that balance between still being kind and caring and people pleasing to a certain degree, but not being too assertive?
Yeah, so not being too aggressive. One of the things that I want people pleasers to understand is that you can't speak up for your needs unless you know what those needs are in the first place. So the first thing is getting back in touch with yourself and understanding what your personality style is, what your life non-negotiables are. Life non-negotiable is something like, for me, I'm a super boring person. I love routine and I love going to bed early. They are actually life non-negotiables for me. If those things don't happen, or I'm thrown or I go to bed late, Beck's not happy, like we need to calm down. And so once you know yourself.
Life non-negotiables.
Yeah, there's a whole series of other ones that you could consider. But if you know what your needs and your life non-negotiables are, then it's much easier to know in this situation, my needs are going to need to be advocated for because it's going to rock me or I'm going to need something else. So awareness first.
So how do we have those conversations after we're aware of them? Give us some tips on how to, you know, because if coming from a people-pleasing place, we don't want to upset people.
Yeah.
So what's the best language to use?
So the best language to use is I feel statements. That can be expanded. I have an acronym in my book, Setting Boundaries, called LIMITS. L is for activating your inner leader. And that's essentially imagining that part of you that knows your worthiness and knows that your needs are going to be met, deserve to be met. I is for making sure that you introduce the boundary. So you introduce the boundary and make sure that the person understands what it is that you need. M is for make the boundary known with as much clarity as possible. I is for introduce consequences. So if the boundary is crossed, make sure that there's consequences. You may not communicate that necessarily because sometimes it's just in the back of your head. And T is for take a stand. And that means that if the boundary has been crossed, you need to make sure that you actually speak up about that and set the consequences in place. And S is for status check, because boundaries are just not set and forget. And most people pleasers will find that bad news because it can feel easier if you just set the boundary once and then hope that everyone knows that that's where it lies. But it's not like that. Sometimes you need to check in with both other people that they're respecting your boundaries, but also with yourself. Are you respecting your own boundaries?
How do we navigate the feeling, say, after we set that boundary, walk away? There are some guilt and I feel bad about this. I feel, I said no. How can we deal with those emotions we're feeling? Is it just a matter of recognizing them and go, okay, that is normal, I'm going to feel that, and moving on? Or what do we do here?
Absolutely. So I think the most powerful thing for people to understand is not setting a boundary without feeling uncomfortable. Sometimes that's impossible. Sometimes, especially if you're a people pleaser and you naturally fawn, setting a boundary, we will feel very uncomfortable to begin with. And that means accepting that you might feel guilty, you might feel anxious, you might go and overthink, or suffer what Brene Brown calls a vulnerability hangover.
I love that word.
Yeah. After you explain what your needs are and then you walk away and think, oh my goodness, I shouldn't have done that. They're not going to like me. They're going to reject me. I'm going to be abandoned. It's really important to accept that those feelings are part of the process as you develop confidence in being able to speak up for your own needs. In terms of being able to manage the feelings, I'm always a fan of making sure that the feeling is allowed to be part of your present moment experience. People run into problems when they try to avoid their feelings or cover them up or gloss over them in some way. As you're feeling the emotion, one of the best things that you can do, one of the simplest things you can do, is identify what the feeling is called and say, right now, I'm feeling a bit guilty. And then allow yourself to sit with it, breathe through it, and then move on to whatever it is that you're next going to do.
Yeah, I love that. Actually naming feelings. And I often think we don't name feelings enough, do we? We just kind of, our fallbacks are sad, happy, guilty, or whatever it may be. But there are so many different names for different feelings, and actually verbalizing them can sometimes just help you feel it and then pull you out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's much more difficult for men, though, especially men in Australian culture. There's something called alexithymia, and alexithymia is the lack of ability or lack of capacity to be able to identify an emotion and therefore label it. And a lot of Australian men who are raised by parents who didn't allow them to show feelings, express feelings, even have feelings, and therefore didn't provide them with a language around feelings, often struggle with alexithymia. And it's news to them that different feelings occur across a spectrum and that those feelings have different names.
And so what should we do in that? Just finally, what should we do in that situation if our partner's like this or we're like this? I mean, how can we encourage to have more conversations about feelings?
Yeah, so the best thing that you can do is to notice when, particularly if we're talking about partnerships, notice when your partner's mood has changed and then check in. I've noticed that you seem a bit quiet. Is everything okay? Do you want to talk about how you're feeling? Now, for men in particular, sometimes that can feel incredibly threatening. So don't start the conversation with, we need to talk, because that's not going to go down well.
No.
Probably activate a fight-flight response.
Yes. And then the fawning might begin.
Exactly. But one of the tips that I love most, if feeling discussions feel threatening for either partner, is to do it while not looking at each other. So do it in the car. Side by side. Do it when you're walking along the beach. Do it when you're swimming and you're just kicking with a kickboard. So you're just looking away from each other, which means there's not the threatening aspect of eye contact, but you're still getting a chance to communicate.
Great advice. Beck, thank you so much for coming on Extra Healthy-ish.
Thanks for having me, Felicity.
Well, there you have it, fawning. Hopefully that gave you some information and tools in your life and with your relationships. If you want more from Dr. Rebecca Ray, you can grab her book. It's called Setting Boundaries. If you want more from us at Body+Soul, remember Extra Healthy-ish. This podcast publishes a new episode every morning, Monday to Thursday. For more info, head to bodyandsoul.com.au or follow us on Instagram or Facebook. Thanks again for joining us. And if you have a moment, we'd be so grateful if you could rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. And until tomorrow, stay extra healthy-ish.